Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. One of the challenges facing many of us recording in any studio, whether it's a home studio, a project studio, a professional studio, is dealing with latency. Now, latency is the time that it takes for a signal to enter your audio interface, pass through the interface, enter the computer, go through your DAW, come back out, and come out of the outputs of the audio interface. That time is called latency, and it can be enough of a delay that it can either create phase issues for you, or it can actually show up as an actual doubling in the signal. In any event, it's not something you want because it can really make it difficult for musicians to perform well, and it's frankly just annoying. So you really don't want to have it in your studio when you're trying to record. It's an issue when you're tracking and when you're overdubbing, not so much when you're mixing, but there are a number of different solutions that you can apply to reduce or even eliminate latency in your recordings. First up, we want to take a look at our computer and our DAW system. You want to ensure that your computer is up to spec, that it meets everything that the manufacturer of the DAW requires. You also want to ensure that you're not running anything unnecessary in the background. Shut everything down so that you're just running your DAW, so all the power of your computer can be applied right there. Perhaps the biggest thing you can do to control latency is to ensure that you have the proper settings inside your DAW, in particular the buffer settings. Now, a buffer is something that takes in data, holds that data, and then releases it. If the buffer's too big, it slows things down and it increases the latency. So you want to go into your settings or your preferences for your DAW and ensure that that buffer is set as low as possible. Now, the trade-off is that when you reduce the buffer, it increases the load on your computer. So you want to make sure you don't go too far, because that can cause problems as well. With a modern computer, you can get that buffer setting way down there and you'll have no problems with latency at all. So for example, I'm working on an Apple MacBook Pro with an M1 Max processor. If I go to my setup here in Pro Tools, go to Playback Engine, we can see my buffer settings here. Now, when you're mixing, the buffer setting can be high. That reduces the load on your computer and allows it to run more plugins. But when you're tracking, you want to get that way down there. And in fact, with this computer running Pro Tools, I can get down to 32 samples, which is extremely low. To figure out the amount of delay that the buffer's causing, you divide the buffer size by the sample rate. With this low of a buffer setting, I can track right through my DAW and really not perceive any delay at all. As you start to get up into the 128, 256, certainly 512 and 1024, you're going to notice that latency from the buffer. So get that set as low as possible. Another thing you can do in your DAW to reduce latency is to raise the sample rate. Every time you double the sample rate, you cut the latency in half. Now, to do that in Pro Tools, you have to do that when you're creating your session. But with many DAWs, you can change that sample rate on the fly. So for example, if you're used to working at 44.1 kilohertz, you might up that to 96K and see what it does to your latency. Now, of course, the trade-off is a higher sample rate, takes more computer power, and it also takes more storage space. With modern computers, modern storage, really not an issue. So run that sample rate up there, you'll reduce your latency. Another factor related to your computer, your audio interface, and your DAW is the drivers you're using. Make sure you're using the manufacturer's optimized drivers for the best results. You can use Core Audio on Mac, there are various things on Windows, but you're best off using the manufacturer's recommended drivers, which will give you the best latency performance. Once you have your computer optimized and your DAW set up for the lowest possible latency, then it's time to look at your audio interface. Now, there are two different types we want to talk about. The first type has Builtin DSP. This is digital signal processing that allows you to actually mix inside the interface itself. That means that the signal doesn't have to pass all the way through the DAW software before it comes back out. It's actually mixed within the interface and is handled much more quickly with no latency issues. Now, when you have this, typically you're going to have an app that runs in your computer that provides you a mixer. For example, I've got an Apollo X4 from Universal Audio running here. If I open up the console, this allows me to create mixes on the DSP that's running inside the interface, and that eliminates those latency issues for me. Many audio interfaces are going to come with a similar app, and that again allows you to create headphone mixes and main mixes that won't have any latency. Now, some audio interfaces don't have DSP, and they take a little different approach. They use what's called direct monitoring. For example, I have the Neve 88M audio interface here. Now, this has a switch here on the front that allows us to set where the monitoring is actually occurring. So if we set this for direct monitoring, that means that the signal coming in is going to be routed immediately right back out with nothing in between, nothing to cause latency or added delays in our signal. So that direct monitoring can be a great solution. Now, the limitation there is that direct monitoring is happening here. The signal never goes into any DSP, it never goes into your computer, so you can't monitor through plugins. And that would be a limitation if you're trying to, for example, put a guitar emulator plugin onto your signal as it's coming in. Not going to happen with direct monitoring. You're just going to hear the dry guitar signal. So depending on what you're doing, direct monitoring can be a great solution, great for vocal recording, those kind of things. You can still add comfort reverb inside your DAW, but you don't have the latency of the actual signal from the microphone being delayed by the interface itself. The final solution would be to use an external hardware mixer to route your signals and to monitor them. So you'd come into the mixer, you can set up your monitoring there with a headphone feed or your monitor feeds, route that signal from the mixer into your DAW for recording, bring the DAW back out so you can monitor there. And that way you can control latency because again, you're not passing through an interface, you're not passing through the DAW software of your computer before you hear the signal. You're actually hearing it directly off the mixer. So that can be a great solution as well. So the whole idea with reducing latency is to first of all optimize what's happening with your computer and your DAW. Get those buffer settings down there. Make sure you're not running unnecessary apps or things in the background. Make sure your computer is up to spec and so on. Second, take advantage of what your audio interface offers, whether it's direct monitoring features or built-in DSP, an app that allows you to mix inside the computer, whatever it might be. Take advantage of those to reduce latency. And if none of those are providing the solution that you need for your latency issues, consider using an external hardware mixer. That'll give you a direct monitoring solution. Signal comes in, mixes, goes right back out, and you won't have any latency issues at all. So latency is certainly something that we need to be aware of, but it's very easily managed using one of the methods that I've talked about in this video. If you have questions about latency or you want to learn more about this topic, stop over to sweetwater.com, in particular the SweetCare section. You can also check out our news and research page. There's all kinds of tech articles, there's videos there that'll help you out and serve as a great resource for you. But of course, the ultimate resource is your Sweetwater sales engineer. Give them a call. They'll be happy to help you figure out how to reduce or totally eliminate latency in your studio. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.